Thank you, Aaron and Nick, for putting on this excellent conference. I think it's the first one that I've really focused on for building something of purpose and values. What I'm going to talk about today is building a real-time feedback culture and how that fits into building a successful team. So as Aaron mentioned, I work at Reflektive, and Reflektive is a real-time performance management platform. If you hadn't had a chance to learn about us yet, we have a table right out there over to the right, or maybe to the left, depending on how you're sitting, and we can talk to you about it. So a lot of the time, so I'm head of HR, employee success, but a lot of my job ends up being talking with our customers about how do you build a culture of feedback? How many of you here are interested in building a culture of feedback or are trying to do that right now? A fair amount. It's a pretty big word out there, actually. The Neuro Leadership Institute, Khalil is here somewhere, and he was talking about it just a bit, but they're a huge researcher on this. So I'm on the phone very often with our customers to help them with, when you implement Reflektive, how do you build actually a culture of real-time feedback? They have a lot of millennials who are joining their organization, and millennials, as we know, want to get feedback. They want to know how they can get better. They want to be promoted probably 6 months from now. And you probably have a lot of new managers who haven't managed before. So helping them understand how to have these constructive and quality conversations is very, very important. So I want to start by defining, hopefully this works, excellent. I'm going to define what a culture of feedback is. So we're going to take a look at this and read it together. A strong feedback culture welcomes feedback and uses it to foster the growth of individuals, teams, and the organization. A feedback culture is one where employees' voices are valued. So there are two things I want to make sure that you hear in here. It fosters the growth of individuals. It helps them understand what it is that they're doing well. It's extremely important. Usually when we think of feedback, we think about constructive. But what am I doing that I should continue doing that I'm doing well? And it's making sure employees' voices are valued. So how do you build an organization where you're asking employees for their input, letting them know you've heard them, and then acting on their feedback? So I'm going to use Reflektive actually as a case study for how we've done that at our organization. So I want to draw that parallel, since it's about fostering the growth of individuals, that a feedback culture is pretty much very similar to a growth-minded culture. If you have people who are thinking about continuous improvement and how I can better myself, then you're really building a continuous feedback environment and continuous growth culture. So I want to start by defining what the problem is. Why is it so difficult to build a real-time feedback culture? Why is this so hard? And usually what I hear when I talk to customers and I say, what is going on right now for you? What's the problem you're trying to fix? So they say, well, Rachel, we have these managers. You can't fully see this. We have manager and employee. And we have this problem. We really want the managers to be giving feedback, but they're not doing it. Does anyone have that problem? We want them to do it. It's not really happening. They're kind of laughing. You probably don't want to raise your hand. I get it. So here's what typically happens. I have too many other things to do. Now, that's more about I don't want to prioritize it. It's a great excuse, but I just don't want to make time for it. And the other problem is it's not comfortable, especially when it's constructive feedback. They don't want to actually have the conversation. And it takes people like us, whether you're an executive or HR, to keep following up. Hey, so-and-so, did you have that conversation? How did it go? Now, from the employee perspective, these millennials, they want to grow, they want to learn. What are they thinking about? Well, it's my manager's job to tell me, and if my manager's not talking to me, it probably means that I'm doing a good job. I'm not hearing feedback. So I don't really need to, it's not really my job to ask. Oh, and by the way, it's a little scary. It's kind of scary to ask for feedback. So I want to try to bridge this divide. There's a big divide between the two of them, and in my mind, a culture of feedback is trying to bridge what's happening between the manager and employee at organizations. Excellent. So what do companies typically do? Well, most of them do manager training to help with this. So they say, cool, Rachel, so what we've done so far, we've done this manager training. And someone earlier today said, education is important, but it's just a one-time thing, and it's not a way to evolve and change cultural norms that have already formed in an organization. So this is great, but it doesn't necessarily equal feedback culture. So I want to show you the different components that we have observed both in our organization and our customers' organizations that really help to build a feedback culture. Now, I do want to bring back the manager training. That's extremely important. In fact, our hashtag at Reflektive is no bad managers. They play a huge role in feedback. So that's most important, but there are many other things. So I want to show you how to ask for feedback. So that's another one. So we want people to ask for it, and NLI, definitely listen to their webinars. They have really good information about it. You want people to ask for it, but it's scary. So I'm going to tell you about education we did for our employees about how to ask. And then the next one is how to receive. So you might ask, but a lot of times you hear feedback, you're like, ugh, I didn't like that. So it's helping people understand what triggers happen. Why do you not like that? How can you maybe find one piece that's going to help you grow? And then the last piece here, I'll back up a bit, is what I called ask, listen, and act. And this is the organization setting the example that employees' voices are valued. And if the organization is asking on a regular basis, what do you think about this? How is this going? We heard you, and here's what we're going to do with your input. If the organization is doing that on a regular basis, that's setting the example for the rest of the employees to start doing that for themselves. So we're going to break down each of these in a moment, but what I want you guys to do is just to take stock of how strong your feedback culture is right now. So on a scale of 1 to 10, just think for a moment. 1 is not very strong, maybe it's barely visible, and 10, you're setting the world record in a feedback culture. So I'm going to give you a moment, talk to the person next to you about how strong your feedback culture is right now at your organization. Hello? Okay, we're going to bring it back up here. You guys really want to talk about feedback. I love it. I'm going to put my hands up here. Excellent. And it's slowly getting quiet. If someone next to you is talking, if you could ask them to stop. Shh. I love it. Okay. So here's the good thing. Whenever it's hard to quiet down a room, it means that you're really interested in this topic, or you just want to talk to the person next to you. But I'm just going to assume this is interesting. So you're going to actually, at the end of this, you're going to write down one thing that you're going to do when you go back to your organization to really help build your culture of feedback. And I'm going to give you some ideas. So ask, listen, and act. So what are we doing at Reflektive right now to show that we care about employees' opinions and that we listen so that they also ask for feedback for themselves? So we call it drinking our own champagne. We're a feedback organization, so we better be a feedback culture, or else it'd be embarrassing. So instead of dog fooding, we call it drinking our own champagne. And by the way, 2 of our values are also about this. So I know we've talked about values being ingrained and making it part of what you're trying to do. 2 of our values are always learning and be curious. So anytime someone writes feedback to one another in our platform, they immediately hashtag one of our values. That's really important. So what do? We have a polling feature, and we use our polling feature almost every single week to get feedback from our employees about how something has gone. And I'm going to give you a few examples. Anytime when we do all hands meeting, we ask them about the value that the all hands meeting brought. Did it give them new knowledge that helps them to do their job better? Because you have to think about, why am I doing an all hands meeting? What's the purpose of it? And am I fulfilling that purpose? So asking them that is really important. Check-ins. So we actually do quarterly conversations instead of an annual or biannual review. And when we do our check-ins afterwards, we ask people, did you have a quality conversation with your manager? Did you get one piece of feedback that you can implement immediately after? Something around that. And then we also ask ENPS. How many of you are familiar with an ENPS? A few. How many of you know about NPS? Excellent. More people. So an ENPS is an Employee Net Promoter Score. So every single month, we ask the question, what's the likelihood you will recommend Reflektive as a great place to work? And then we look at the trending over time. And the trending is important, but even probably equally important are the comments we get from that. Because then I look at the themes along with my HR team, and we see what the themes are telling us. So asking is one part of it, but I would say even more important, and the panel before this was talking about listening and the importance of listening, we need to let them know that we heard them. So about once a quarter at our all hands meetings, we have a section that's called We Hear You. And we say, hey, we've asked you these polls. These are the themes that we heard from the polls. And this is what we're going to do about it. Now, sometimes we'll get feedback, and I'll give an example, and those of you who are from Reflektive will probably laugh. We'll get one that says, we want unlimited paid time off. Now, our company is not one that does unlimited paid time off for particular reasons, and we'll say that, like, hey, we heard from you, you wanted unlimited paid time off. We're actually not doing it. This is what we're doing, and we're going to help you understand why. Now, you might not agree, but at least you know that we heard what you were saying. So that's one example. Now, what do we do to act? So every time we say, we heard you, this is what we're doing, we introduce Reflektive Friday, which is a way, I think Scott from Meetup also mentioned, every week now we introduce all of our new hires and we celebrate. Every single week we celebrate wins, promotions, transfers, because we're trying to encourage people to be transferring around. But we do that every Friday now. We update our check-in. So every time I mention, we do a check-in, which is a quarterly review conversation, we see how it went. And we're actually currently, because we're growing so quickly, every time we do it, it needs to be improved even more. So we're actually in the midst of updating our check-in conversation, the way that we're doing it. And then the last thing that we heard is, hey, Reflektive's growing very quickly. We've tripled in size since I joined in the past 2 years. We need to know where we're going. And so what we said to them was, thank you, first of all, for letting us know. We're going to make sure to be communicating about our mission, vision, and strategy on a regular basis. Okay, so that was about the company setting the example using a polling feature. You may want to use a Google form. You can use employee surveys, obviously. The only challenge with employee surveys, back to the time between asking and acting, it's probably about 4 or 5 months at larger organizations. I worked at Fidelity, and it took a really long time to get through the feedback. That's why the polling is really nice, because you can ask it and immediately act on it. Okay, so how to ask for feedback. So back to definitely look at the Neuro Leadership Institute. We did some training for our employees to encourage them to be asking for feedback. And I worked with them on, when do I ask for feedback? We have a lot of people, it might be their first or second job, and they're like, oh, that sounds like a cool idea. I don't really know when to do that. So you have to be pretty directive with them. When do you ask for it? Who do you ask for it from? We actually have a request feedback feature in Reflektive, so you can go in and just say, hey, so-and-so, hey, Aaron, how did I do? What's one thing that could have made my presentation better? And you would let me know. So it's asking from who and when, but most importantly, it's how to ask the question. What's the question that most commonly people ask you on how you can get better? If they come off of a presentation, what do they typically say? How did I do? Yeah, exactly. How did I do? That's such an open-ended question. I don't know. You did well. Most people are like, oh, you did a good job. Was that helpful? No. No, what am I supposed to do with that information? Except now I feel good, but that will last very briefly. I don't know what I did well, and I don't know how I can get better. So we give them frameworks. They need some kind of framework to ask. Stop, start, continue. I'm sure you're familiar with most of these. The ones I like the most are, what's one thing that would make it 10% better? I'm always assuming I could have done a little bit better. That gets the best results, at least for me. What's one thing? So you're not feeling like you have to do too much. What's one thing that could make this better? So we actually have some of these embedded in our tool. It's kind of in gray font. So when people go to ask for feedback, then they see these prompts and it helps them with how to ask the question. Now, the other thing is, this is not a training. Back to a training is not going to change behavior. There are a lot of other things that are under this. But one thing I wanted to let you guys know that we did, and this was prompted again by NLI, they did a great webinar about requesting feedback. And they said, why don't you do a request feedback campaign? And so we did one campaign. It was a challenge, and every week you had to ask for feedback. The first 2 weeks you asked for an area of strength, because that's a little easier. And then the last 2 weeks you have to ask for an area that you can do better. And the other thing that's in here is you want to ask a few people so that you see thematically about what's going on for you. It's not just one person's perspective, it's multiple people's perspective. And then we did a little competition. The ones who asked the most questions got a little prize. We like to do that. But just having a concerted effort towards asking them to do this is very helpful. I'm happy to tell you more about that after the presentation. Now, last is how to receive feedback. Now, when you receive feedback, there are a lot of triggers that can happen, whether it's your personal truth, you don't like who it came from. So we brought in some experts who are behind the book, Thanks for the Feedback. This is a really, really good book, by the way. You may want to take it down, about the science of asking for feedback and receiving it. So we brought in an awesome facilitator. I bring her every organization that I've worked at to talk to people about the best way to receive feedback. And I'm going to just give you a few quick things that she said to us. One important, separating the what from the who. You might not like who it's coming from. Maybe you don't really trust them, but maybe there's a tidbit in what they said and you can test that out with someone else. Asking for clarification. So a lot of managers will come to me and they're not happy about what their leader may have given them feedback on because it's very ambiguous. Rachel, I want to get promoted. I want to be a director. My manager says I need to operate at that level. What does that mean? So it's helping them with how to ask clarifying questions so that they get more specific feedback. You can't always assume that the feedback giver is going to be able to do that well. It's empowering the employees. And then the last one is dismantling distortions. People can tend to, oh, I had this feedback conversation, I'm a terrible employee. And just helping them understand the distortions that they tend to make when they receive the feedback. Last but not least, I wanted to show this to you. When managers are a little worried about how to give feedback, or employees say, you know, the way my manager gives me feedback is not very useful, I tell them to fill something like this out. You can do this however you want. But you could have, hey manager, why don't you ask them the best way they like to get feedback? The best way to give it to me, I like to hear positive feedback this often. Some people want to hear it a lot. Some people don't need to hear it very often. But this is a way to facilitate that conversation. How often do you want to hear it? What's a good time you received it or a bad time? Because that opens up that feedback dialogue and helps them learn from one another. So I'll end with this little growth divide study. We did a lot of research around the differences between how managers perceive things and how employees perceive things, especially around growth and reviews. So if you want to learn a little bit more information about some of these things, you're welcome to take a look at growthdivide.com. Reflektive is one of the authors behind that to learn some of the information around that feedback environment. I sped through that a little because I have 1.5 minutes left, as Erin is kindly showing me. What questions do you guys have through any of the content? You want the previous slide back? This one? Yeah, absolutely, if you want to take a look at this. What other questions?
Does it work? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What channels do we use? Yeah. We do 2 different ones, and one of them is we do it through an all-hands conversation. So in our all-hands meeting, which is when the whole company comes together, we do it once a month, and we have a section that's called We Hear You. And we say, this is what our NPS is doing, our ENPS, sorry. This is how the trend looks. This is what we heard from you, and this is what we're going to do. And then we follow up because, let's face it, some people dial in, but they're multitasking, they don't really listen. So then we do a follow-up email and let them know, again, this is what we're doing. And then as individual pieces actually come up, so for the new performance management program I'm working to build, I'll remind them again, hey, we heard this from you, here was your feedback, and this is what we're gonna do for you. So we continue to do it. Sometimes we might do it in Slack as well, or whatever, instant messenger, just to remind people and keep it top of mind. Yeah. All right, and it is the end of the session. Thank you so much. Good luck with forming your cultures of feedback. Enjoy lunch.